The laughter echoed through the pristine corridors of the Veltan research facility like a virus, infecting every corner with its manic resonance. Commander Rixel paused mid-stride, his four eyes dilating in synchronized confusion. In 3 centuries of service across 17 conquered worlds, he had never heard such a sound from a prison block. Report. He clicked through his mandibles to Sub-Commander Nethara, whose purple carapace was already shifting to the pale yellow of unease. Specimen H001, sir. The last human. He has been vocal for the past rotation. They descended deeper into the facility's bowels, past laboratories where Veltan scientists had spent decades dissecting human physiology, psychology, and culture. The human extinction protocol had been deemed complete 18 months ago, when their death squads eliminated the final resistance cell on New Terra. Humanity had fought with characteristic savagery until the end, turning every city into a fortress, every civilian into a combatant. But even their legendary stubbornness couldn't overcome the Veltan war machine, all except one. Marcus Vex had been captured alive during the final siege, not through superior tactics or overwhelming force, but because he had simply walked out of the burning ruins with his hands raised. The Veltan High Command had been suspicious of such easy surrender, from a species known for preferring death to capture, but Marcus had proven to valuable alive. The last repository of human knowledge, the final specimen for their xenological studies. The laughter grew louder as they approached Cell Block 7. Several junior technicians clustered outside the observation chamber, their antennae twitching with nervous energy. Through the transparent aluminum wall, they could see him. Marcus Vex sat cross-legged on the floor of his cell, head thrown back in genuine mirth. His beard had grown wild during his captivity, streaked with premature gray that made his 35 years look like 50. Scars crisscrossed his arms and torso, some from battle, others self-inflicted during his first months of captivity. But his eyes burned with something that made even battle-hardened Veltan warriors unconsciously step back. How long has he been like this? Rixel demanded. Since the morning shift began, sir. We performed the standard neural scans, no indication of psychotic break or mental degradation. If anything, his brain activity suggests heightened cognitive function. The commander studied the human through the barrier. Marcus had noticed their arrival and was now staring directly at them, still chuckling softly. His lips moved in what the translation matrix identified as an ancient human language, Latin. What is he saying? The young technician's skin flushed, deep orange with embarrassment. We cannot translate it fully, sir, but the phrase keeps repeating. Tempus fugit, memento mori. Our linguistic database suggests it relates to the passage of time and death. Marcus suddenly stood and walked to the cell door. He placed both palms against the surface and pressed his face close to the barrier, his breath fogging the material. When he spoke, it was in perfect Veltan prime. Hello, Commander. I've been waiting for you. Rixel felt his secondary hearts skip a beat. Humans weren't supposed to learn their language. The neural pathways were incompatible. Yet this one spoke with the accent of a military academy graduate. You know why I laugh? Marcus continued, his grin widening to reveal teeth he'd somehow kept perfectly white despite months of captivity. Because I finally understand the joke. The greatest joke in the galaxy. What joke? Rixel found himself asking, though protocol demanded he maintain interrogation procedures. Marcus stepped back from the barrier and gestured around his cell with theatrical grandeur. This whole time, you've been studying the wrong thing. You dissected our bodies, mapped our minds, cataloged our fears and hopes. You learned everything about humanity except the one thing that actually mattered. The human's laughter ceased abruptly, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. You never asked why we kept fighting when we knew we couldn't win. You never wondered why a species would choose extinction over surrender. Most importantly, Marcus placed his hand on what appeared to be a solid wall panel. With a soft hiss, it slid open to reveal a hidden passage. You never checked if the door was actually locked. The alarm klaxons began wailing 3 seconds later. The facility's emergency lighting bathed everything in pulsing crimson. As Marcus Vex stepped into the corridor, 16 months of careful observation had taught him the guard rotations, ventilation, schedules, and the precise moment when the detention block's AI performed its daily maintenance cycle. He had exactly 11 minutes before the lockdown protocols engaged. Commander Rixel's mandibles clacked rapidly as he processed the impossibility before him. Seal the block, authorization Crimson 7. But Marcus was already moving with the fluid precision of someone who had spent months planning this moment. He dove left as the first energy pulse scorched the air where his head had been, rolled behind a support strut, and came up running toward the emergency stairwell. Sub-Commander Nethara led the pursuit, her plasma rifle charging with a distinctive whine. Target acquired. Human is proceeding to level C7. The chase became a deadly game of three-dimensional chess. Through the facility's maze-like structure, Marcus had memorized every pipe, every junction, every maintenance hatch during his captivity. The Veltan had superior technology and numbers, but he had something they couldn't understand: the desperate cunning of a species that had turned guerrilla warfare into an art form. He reached the first weapons cache at the exact moment Nethara rounded the corner behind him. The Veltan science officer had 17 kills to her name, and reflexes honed by decades of combat experience. She should have had him. But Marcus had spent months studying Veltan physiology. Through careful observation of his captors, he knew their eyes were adapted for their homeworld's dual-star system, excellent for detecting movement, but poor at processing rapid shifts in light intensity. The flashbang grenade he'd improvised from laboratory chemicals and smuggled components lit up the corridor like a newborn star. Nethara's agonized shriek echoed off the walls as her oversensitive eyes overloaded. Marcus was beside her before she hit the ground, relieving her of weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency. The plasma rifle felt alien in his hands, but the principles were universal: point and pull. "Sorry about this," he murmured, and meant it. Then he triggered the neural disruptor at minimum setting. She'd live, but she'd be unconscious for hours. The facility's communication system crackled to life with Rixel's voice. "All units converge on level C7. Lethal force authorized. Repeat specimen is to be terminated on site." Marcus smiled grimly as he accessed the next cache. They still didn't understand. This wasn't an escape attempt, it was something far more dangerous. He'd had 16 months to think, to plan, to remember every slight and every tortured scream from the laboratory levels above. The Veltan had made one crucial error in their xenological studies. They had assumed human patience was a weakness rather than a weapon. Security teams flooded the corridors as Marcus fought his way deeper into the facility. The first squad caught him at Junction 7 Alpha, where the maintenance tunnel intersected with the primary power conduit. 3 Veltan warriors in full combat, armor, energy shields raised, advancing with textbook precision. Marcus let them get halfway down the corridor before he triggered the explosive charge he'd planted in the power coupling. The electromagnetic pulse fried their shields and armor systems, leaving them vulnerable to the jury-rigged projectile weapons he'd constructed from lab equipment. Steel bearings launched by chemical propellant might have been primitive compared to plasma rifles, but they were just as lethal against unarmored chitin. The second squad was smarter, using drones and indirect fire to flush him from his position. Marcus responded by collapsing an entire section of corridor behind him, sealing off their pursuit route and forcing them to take the long way around. Every minute of delay brought him closer to his true objective. By the time he reached sublevel 9, the facility's casualty reports were climbing steadily: 12 Veltan dead, 23 wounded, and one increasingly desperate human working his way toward the facility's central core. Commander Rixel's voice over the comm had lost its professional composure. "How is one primitive managing this? We have him outnumbered 100 to 1. But Marcus wasn't trying to win, not yet. He was setting the stage for something much larger. As he bypassed the final security checkpoint and entered the facility's quantum communication array, he allowed himself one moment of genuine satisfaction. The Veltan had spent decades studying humanity's capacity for violence. Now they were about to receive a practical demonstration of humanity's capacity for revenge. He began uploading the virus he'd been mentally composing for 16 months, a gift that would keep on giving long after his inevitable death. The quantum communication array hummed with barely contained energy as Marcus Vex interfaced with the Veltan network, his fingers calloused from months of scraping away at his cell wall to create the hidden passage, now danced across alien control surfaces. With surprising dexterity, the neural interface crown he'd stolen from Laboratory 7 pressed against his skull, translating human thoughts into Veltan data protocols. Above him, the facility erupted into chaos as emergency teams attempted to regain control. Commander Rixel's voice echoed through the ventilation system, growing more frantic with each passing minute. Engineering teams to Sublevel 9. Cut all external communications. Authorization Omega Black. But Marcus had anticipated this response. The virus he was uploading wasn't just digital malware, it was a weaponized piece of human psychology, encoded into executable data. For 16 months, he'd observed how Veltan minds processed information, identified their cognitive vulnerabilities, and crafted something that would exploit those weaknesses. On a species-wide scale, the first upload completed just as the blast doors began to seal. Marcus grinned as he watched the progress indicator tick toward 100%. The package was already propagating through the Veltan military network, disguised as routine facility reports. In 6 hours, it would reach their home world. In 12, it would contaminate every Veltan database in known space. Primitive doesn't begin to cover it, he whispered to himself, remembering Rixel's earlier words. The doors exploded inward in a shower of molten metal as Veltan assault troops breached the communication center. Marcus dove behind a server bank as plasma bursts superheated the air around him. The lead trooper, a massive warrior whose carapace bore the scars of a dozen campaigns, advanced with methodical precision. Target acquired. Surrendering is no longer an option. Human. Marcus popped up from cover, the captured plasma rifle bucking in his hands. His first shot took the warrior's center mass, cracking chitin and sending green ichor spattering across the walls. The second and third shots found gaps in the creature's armor, dropping it with a sound like breaking glass, but more kept coming. The Veltan had committed their entire security force to this single corridor, and Marcus found himself fighting a desperate running battle through the facility's most sensitive areas. He used their own technology against them, overloading power conduits to create electromagnetic barriers, triggering fire suppression systems that filled chambers with toxic foam, even reprogramming maintenance drones to attack their former masters. The violence escalated beyond anything the sterile research facility had ever witnessed. Marcus moved through the complex like a one-man plague, leaving destruction in his wake. But he wasn't mindlessly rampaging. Every action served a larger purpose. Each system he sabotaged, each security measure he circumvented, was designed to buy time for his virus to spread. In Laboratory 12, he discovered the vivisection tables, where they had dissected living humans in the name of science. The preserved organs floating in biogel containers made his vision blur with rage. He methodically destroyed every specimen, every research note, every piece of data they had stolen from his dying species. The screams of tortured humans seemed to echo from the walls themselves. For Dr. Elena Vasquez, he whispered, recognizing tissue samples from the expedition's chief xenobiologist. For Captain Jin Watanabe, another table, another identification. For all of them, Commander Rixel finally cornered him in the facility's central atrium, a vast chamber that rose through 6 levels, its transparent walls offering a view of the alien landscape outside. The Veltan commander had lost his professional composure entirely, his mandibles clicking with barely controlled fury. You're insane. Do you understand what you've done? The research here represented decades of work. Marcus stood among the wreckage of the facility's main computer core, plasma rifle trained on the approaching Veltan forces. His stolen armor was scorched and cracked, green blood, not all of it Veltan, dripping from various wounds. But his eyes still burned with that terrible clarity. I understand exactly what I've done, he replied, his voice carrying clearly across the atrium. I've given humanity something we never had during the wartime, to be remembered properly. The second virus upload was complete. This one contained something far more dangerous than malware. Contained humanity's true history, recorded from the perspective of the conquered rather than the conquerors. The Vultan's own propaganda networks would soon be flooded with testimonies, battle footage, and documentation of every atrocity committed during the human extinction protocol. You want to know why I was laughing in that cell? Marcus continued, backing toward the atrium's central lift shaft, because I finally realized the joke. You thought you were studying humanity's final specimen, but you were actually housing humanity's final weapon. The lift shaft stretched for 100 meters to the surface. The gravity generators that normally provided safe transport had been conveniently sabotaged. Marcus looked up at the distant opening and smiled. The door was never locked because I was never really your prisoner. I was your reckoning. He triggered the emergency ascent just as the Vultan forces opened fire. The last they saw of Marcus Vex was his silhouette disappearing upward into darkness, carried by momentum and pure human audacity toward what should have been certain death. But humanity had never been particularly concerned with what should have been possible. Marcus Vex rocketed up the lift shaft like a human missile, the emergency ascent system screaming protest as it carried him far beyond safe operational parameters. Below him, Vultan weapons fire lit up the darkness in brilliant streams of coherent energy, but he was already beyond their effective range. The gravity generators he'd sabotaged created pockets of altered physics that sent him careening off the shaft walls in bone-jarring impacts that would have killed a lesser human. He emerged onto the surface of Kepler-4 to be like an avenging ghost, rolling across the landing platform in a spray of sparks and twisted metal. The night sky above was ablaze with the aurora-like phenomenon created by the planet's dual magnetosphere, a sight that had once filled human colonists with wonder. Before the Vultan turned their settlements to glass, the facility's surface installations spread before him like a mechanized city, defense turrets, landing pads, and the massive communication array that beamed data across the galaxy. But Marcus wasn't interested in running anymore. The tactical shift he'd been planning for months was finally at hand. Emergency klaxons wailed as Vultan forces boiled out of hidden bunkers and surface access points. The facility's automated defense grid swiveled toward him, targeting sensors, painting him with crimson dots. Marcus stood in the center of the kill zone and laughed, not the manic sound that had first drawn attention to his escape, but something colder and infinitely more dangerous. The first turret fired its plasma blast, vaporizing the ground where he'd been standing. But Marcus was already moving, following patterns he'd memorized during countless hours of studying the facility's external security footage. He rolled behind a communications relay just as 3 more turrets opened fire simultaneously. There, beams intersecting in space and creating a brief artificial star. What the Vultan couldn't understand was that Marcus wasn't trying to avoid their weapons. He was hurting them. Each movement, each dive for cover, was calculated to make the defense grid fire in specific patterns. The targeting AI was sophisticated but predictable, following algorithms that prioritized threat assessment over collateral damage. The brutal consequences of that programming became apparent when the grid's interlocking fields of fire began intersecting with the facility's critical infrastructure. Plasma meant to incinerate one human instead struck cooling towers, power relays, and atmospheric processors. Marcus turned their own defenses into weapons of mass destruction against themselves. Commander Rixel's voice echoed from concealed speakers. All units, switch to manual targeting. The human is manipulating our automated systems. But it was too late for such tactical adjustments. Marcus had reached the primary communication array, a tower that stretched to kilometers into the thin atmosphere, its quantum transmitters capable of punching signals through hyperspace to any point in the galaxy. The structure was too valuable to risk with heavy weapons fire, which meant the Vultan would have to come for him in person. He had been counting on exactly this limitation. The first assault team rappelled down from aircraft, their powered armor gleaming in the auroral light. Marcus met them on the tower's first platform, using the structure's support beams as cover while he picked them off with captured weapons. Vultan warriors, bred for courage and trained for victory, found themselves facing something their experience couldn't process a human who fought not to survive, but to achieve maximum damage before his inevitable death. The battle became a three-dimensional nightmare. As more assault teams attacked from multiple angles, Marcus climbed the tower under fire, using maintenance ladders and service platforms to stay ahead of his pursuers. Behind him, Vultan's soldiers died in ways their tacticians had never anticipated, electrocuted by jury-rigged power traps, crushed by sections of tower he'd weakened with shaped charges, or simply outmaneuvered by a human who treated three-dimensional combat like a deadly jungle gym. Commander Nethara, recovered from her earlier encounter and burning for revenge, led the pursuit with grim determination. Her team of elite hunters had never failed to track down their prey, but Marcus was rewriting the rules of engagement with every movement. When they cornered him on Platform 73, he triggered an explosive that sent the entire section plummeting toward the surface, with himself still on it. The Vultan watched in amazement as Marcus rode the falling debris like a human surfer, leaping from piece to piece as the platform disintegrated around him. He landed hard on Platform 67, rolled with the impact, and came up firing. 2 more hunters died before they could process what they just witnessed. Impossible. Nethara clicked through her mandibles. No creature could survive that fall, but Marcus was already climbing again, now only 300 meters from the tower's peak. The quantum transmitter ray waited above him like a technological crown, its dish arrays capable of broadcasting his final message to every inhabited world in the galaxy. The third virus upload, the one that would turn humanity's extinction into the most powerful recruitment tool in galactic history. As he climbed, more Vultan forces converged on the tower, the night sky filled with aircraft, their search beams turning the darkness into artificial day. Ground forces surrounded the tower's base, cutting off any possibility of retreat. Marcus was trapped with nowhere to run and no hope of survival, which was exactly where he wanted to be. From the tower's peak, he could see the transport ships landing in the distance, reinforcements arriving from the orbital fleet. Soon there would be thousands of Vultan warriors hunting him across the facility's surface. But numbers meant nothing now. He had reached the point where the only victory that mattered was making sure his death had meaning. The transmitter array hummed to life as he interfaced with its controls, uploading the final piece of his masterwork to the galaxy beyond. The quantum transmitter array erupted in blinding light as Marcus Vex initiated the final upload, broadcasting humanity's death song to every corner of civilized space. Below him, the Vultan facility transformed into a war zone, as orbital dropships disgorged hundreds of reinforcements onto the surface platforms. The night sky became a constellation of weapons fire as aircraft, ground forces, and the tower's automated defenses created a killing field that stretched for kilometers in every direction. Marcus stood at the apex of the communications tower, 2 kilometers above the surface, as the galaxy's most advanced military force converged on a single human. The irony wasn't lost on him. It had taken the extinction of his entire species to make the Vultan take humanity seriously as a threat, but he intended to make every casualty count. The first wave of assault troops reached the tower's upper levels just as the upload hit 70% completion. These weren't the facility's security guards, they were Vultan Death Watch, elite warriors whose carapaces bore the ritual scars of 100 victories. They ascended the tower like a living tide of chitin and plasma fire, their movements coordinated with mechanical precision. Marcus met them on Platform 92 with everything he had left. The captured plasma rifle in his hands spat coherent energy in controlled bursts, each shot carefully aimed at joints in Vultan armor where chitin met synthetic materials. The first warrior through the access hatch disintegrated in a shower of green ichor and ceramic fragments. The second lost 3 limbs before his nervous system registered the damage, but they kept coming. For every Vultan that fell, 2 more took their place, climbing over the corpses of their comrades with unwavering determination. Marcus found himself fighting a desperate running battle up the tower's remaining levels, using every trick he'd learned during humanity's final war. The maintenance sections became abattoirs as he triggered improvised explosives, sending twisted metal and alien body parts raining down on the platforms below. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows. As the tower's structural integrity began to fail under the sustained assault, Marcus used the damage to his advantage, creating choke points where superior numbers meant nothing. On Platform 97, Sub-Commander Nethara finally caught up with him. Her hunting pack had been reduced to 3 survivors, their armor scarred and pitted from the running firefight. She raised her rifle with careful precision, her 4 eyes locked on Marcus's center mass. End of the line, human. Your species' last act will be a whimper, not a roar. Marcus looked at her over the sights of his own weapon, his face streaked with green blood and soot. The upload progress indicator in his peripheral vision read 87%. So close. You really don't understand what's happening here, do you? The firefight that followed turned the platform into a microcosm of the war that had consumed 2 star systems. Marcus and the 3 Veltan warriors danced around each other in a lethal ballet, using support beams and equipment clusters for cover as they traded shots at point-blank range. The human's tactics were unorthodox, desperate, and utterly unpredictable. He fought like someone who had nothing left to lose, because he had already lost everything that mattered. Nethara's first shot missed by millimeters, superheating the air where Marcus had been standing. His return fire took her left secondary arm off at the shoulder, sending her spinning behind a power coupling. The remaining 2 warriors tried to flank him from opposite directions, but Marcus had anticipated the maneuver. The shaped charge he'd placed in the platform's support structure brought down half the level in a thunderous collapse. When the dust cleared, only Marcus and Nethara remained standing. She was bleeding from multiple wounds, her rifle lost in the debris, but her primary arms still held a pair of curved energy blades. Marcus's plasma rifle was empty, its power cell drained, leaving him with nothing but the combat knife he'd crafted. From lab equipment, they circled each other like predators, human and alien locked in a contest that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Nethara was faster, stronger, and better armed, but Marcus had spent 16 months learning to hate with perfect clarity, and that hatred had been refined into something approaching art. The blade fight was brief and vicious. Nethara's superior reach and training should have ended it quickly, but Marcus fought with the desperate cunning of a species that had turned survival into a science. He used her own momentum against her, turning her strikes into overextensions that left her vulnerable to counterattack. When it ended, green blood pooled around 2 bodies on the shattered platform, but Marcus was still breathing when the upload hit 100%. The quantum transmitter ray pulsed with final energy as his virus propagated across the galactic network in the space of microseconds. Every major communication hub in Veltan space received the same message: humanity's true history, broadcast from the grave by their last survivor. The documentation of every atrocity, every war crime, every moment of courage in humanity's final war against extinction. More importantly, it carried something the Veltan couldn't understand: proof that even total victory might not be enough to silence the human spirit. Marcus had turned his own death into a recruitment poster for every species that had ever looked at the Veltan Empire and wondered if resistance was possible. As fresh waves of assault troops swarmed up the tower, Marcus dragged himself to the transmitter's primary control node. His body was failing, punctured by energy blades and ravaged by the sustained combat. But he had one final surprise for his captors: the tower's quantum core could be overloaded. It would take precise timing and a complete understanding of Veltan technology, but the explosion would be visible from orbit, a funeral pyre that would announce to the galaxy that humanity's last representative had chosen to burn rather than surrender. His finger hovered over the activation sequence as boots thundered on the platforms below. Soon they would reach him, and the galaxy's most thorough military force would finally claim their prize. Marcus smiled and began the countdown. The quantum core's overload sequence initiated with a sound like reality tearing at the seams. Deep within the transmitter array, exotic matter began cascading through containment fields that were never designed to handle such energetic reactions. Marcus Vex had turned the galaxy's most sophisticated communication device into a weapon of mass destruction, and he had exactly 4 minutes before the explosion would vaporize everything. Within a 50-kilometer radius, Commander Rixel's voice echoed from concealed speakers throughout the tower, his professional composure finally cracking under the weight of catastrophic loss. All units evacuate immediately. The human has triggered a quantum cascade failure. Repeat full evacuation. Authorization extinction 7. But evacuation wasn't possible for the assault troops, who had finally reached the tower's peak. They found Marcus propped against the transmitter's primary control housing, green blood from his wounds mixing with his own crimson life force on the platform's metal grating. His breathing was labored, his vision blurring from blood loss, but his eyes still held that terrible clarity that had haunted his captors for months. The lead trooper of Veltan war leader whose carapace bore the scars of the human extinction. Campaign approached with weapons raised, but no longer firing. At this point, killing Marcus would be a mercy compared to letting him die in the quantum fire he'd created. Why? The warrior asked in heavily accented standard. Your species is extinct. Your worlds are ash. What could possibly justify this madness? Marcus laughed, the sound wet with internal bleeding, but still carrying that edge of perfect understanding. You really want to know? After 16 months of studying me like a lab rat, you still don't understand what makes humans tick. The countdown timer showed 3 minutes and 17 seconds. The tower was already beginning to vibrate as the quantum cascade built toward critical mass. In the distance, Veltan aircraft were fleeing the facility at maximum speed, their pilots having no desire to become part of an expanding sphere of annihilated matter. We're not just another conquered species, Marcus continued, pulling himself to his feet with enormous effort. We're the ones who looked at your empire and said no. Every world you've taken fell because they tried to negotiate, tried to find some compromise that would let them survive. Humans are the first species you've met that chose extinction over slavery. More Veltan warriors arrived on the platform, but they made no move to approach. The quantum core's instability had reached the point where any sudden movement might accelerate the cascade. They were trapped with the dying human, waiting for annihilation in a prison of their own making. And now you've given me the perfect platform to explain that choice to the entire galaxy, Marcus said, gesturing toward the transmitter array. Every species that's ever wondered if resistance was possible just got their answer. Broadcast live, in high definition, direct from humanity's last stand. 2 minutes 41 seconds. The platform shuddered as the first containment field failed somewhere in the tower's depths. Emergency lighting bathed everything in crimson, as the structure began tearing itself apart at the molecular level. But Marcus wasn't finished with his final sermon. You studied our bodies, but you never understood our souls. You mapped our brains, but you missed our spirits. The thing that made us human wasn't our technology or our tactics, it was our absolute refusal to accept defeat as permanent. Every setback was just set up for the comeback. The Veltan war leader's mandibles clicked nervously as he processed the implications. Your entire species committed suicide rather than submit. That's not courage, it's insanity. Maybe, Marcus admitted, but it's our brand of insanity, and we've just exported it to the rest of the galaxy. How long do you think your empire will last when every conquered world starts asking why they didn't choose the human option? 1 minute 53 seconds. The quantum cascade was accelerating beyond all theoretical parameters. The tower's superstructure began to glow with Cherenkov radiation as exotic particles tore through normal matter. But even as reality began to unravel around them, Marcus forced himself to stand straight and meet his executioner's eyes. You want to know the real joke? The one that had me laughing in that cell? His voice carried clearly despite the increasing chaos. You thought capturing me was the end of the story, but I was never the ending, I was the sequel. The war leader raised his weapon, perhaps intending to grant Marcus a quick death before the quantum fire claimed them all. But the human held up one bloodied hand in a gesture of mock surrender. Too late for that, friend. We're all going out together, and the whole galaxy is watching. Thanks to your own communication network, every world in known space just witnessed humanity's final act of defiance. You've turned our extinction into the most powerful piece of propaganda in galactic history. 47 seconds. The Veltan warriors looked at each other with growing understanding of what Marcus had accomplished. His death wouldn't be the quiet end of a conquered species, it would be a recruiting poster for revolution. Every oppressed world would remember the human who chose to burn rather than break. Marcus smiled as the countdown entered its final phase. Through the tower's transparent sections, he could see the Veltan facility in chaos below, aircraft fleeing toward the horizon as the first shockwaves began rippling outward from the quantum core. Soon there would be nothing left but a crater where their research station had stood. Humanity's last lesson for the galaxy, he whispered as the cascade reached critical mass. Sometimes the only way to win is to make sure your enemy's victory costs them everything they value. The quantum core exploded in a pillar of light that could be seen from space. The quantum cascade explosion vaporized the entire Veltan research facility in a sphere of annihilated matter that expanded at near light speed, before collapsing back on itself in a display of exotic physics that rewrote several textbooks. Where Commander Rixel's installation had stood, only a perfectly smooth crater remained, its glass-lined walls reflecting the alien aurora with mirror-like precision. The shockwave was detected by seismic equipment on 3 neighboring worlds. But the real explosion was happening across the galaxy. As Marcus Vex's final upload propagated through every major communication network in known space, the virus he'd spent 16 months crafting wasn't just malware. It was a perfectly designed piece of psychological warfare that transformed humanity's extinction into the most compelling call to arms the galaxy had ever witnessed. On Proxima Centauri B, the Veltan Colonial Administration found their public information displays hijacked by footage of human resistance fighters making their last stand in the ruins of New Geneva. The broadcasting lasted for 17 hours before technicians could regain control. But by then half the planet's population had witnessed humanity's final moments. In devastating detail, the Tau Ceti Systems Communication Hub became ground zero for what historians would later call the Human Memorial Cascade. Marcus's virus replicated itself through every connected network, turning routine data transfers into vehicles for humanity's testament. Trade routes, military channels, even personal communication devices began broadcasting the same message. This is what extinction looks like when a species chooses to die free rather than live enslaved. Within 72 hours, the first riots began on Vega 7. Where Veltan mining operations had kept the local population in conditions barely distinguishable from slavery. The uprising was crushed within days, but the spark had been lit. Similar revolts erupted across 17 worlds in the first month alone, each one accompanied by the same battle cry. Remember the humans. The Veltan High Command convened emergency sessions to address what their analysts termed cascading rebellion syndrome. For the first time in their empire's 3-century history, conquered populations were choosing death over surrender en masse. Entire worlds were committing civilizational suicide rather than submit to Veltan rule, turning every victory into a Pyrrhic exercise in ruling over ash and graves. Admiral Keffer, architect of the Human Extinction Protocol, found himself facing an investigation into strategic failures that had transformed humanity's defeat into a galactic propaganda victory. His carefully prepared testimony to the High Command would become legendary for its bitter accuracy. We won every battle, conquered every world, and eliminated every human military asset. By every strategic metric, the Human Extinction Protocol was a complete success. But we failed to account for one variable: the human capacity to turn defeat into victory through the simple act of dying well. Marcus Vex didn't escape our facility. He turned it into a broadcast studio for humanity's final performance. The investigation's findings were classified at the highest levels, but portions leaked to resistance networks that had formed in the wake of Marcus's broadcast. The Veltan Empire, for all its military might, had never faced an enemy that weaponized its own extinction. Every standard counterinsurgency protocol assumed the enemy wanted to survive. 6 months after the Kepler-440 incident, the Empire faced its first successful planetary rebellion, when the industrial world of Kepler 186f declared independence. The local Veltan garrison, outnumbered 50-1 by a population that had embraced the human doctrine, found themselves facing enemies who fought with the certainty that death was preferable to defeat. The rebellion succeeded not through superior tactics or technology, but through absolute commitment to the principle Marcus Vex had died to establish. The Kepler 186F liberation became the template for what military historians would term Vex doctrine revolutionary warfare, where the goal wasn't survival, but maximum cost imposition on occupying forces. Resistance cells across the galaxy began studying humanity's final war, treating Marcus's broadcast as a strategic manual rather than a historical document. 1 year after Marcus's death, the Veltan Empire controlled 47 fewer worlds than it had the day before his escape. The trend was accelerating. Each successful rebellion inspired 3 more attempts, creating a cascade effect that stretched imperial resources beyond sustainable limits. The High Command found itself trying to occupy populations that had learned humanity's final lesson. Some things were worth dying for, and freedom topped that list. The Empire's response was predictably brutal. Entire worlds were sterilized rather than risk further contamination by what Veltan propaganda termed human mental plague. But each act of genocide only validated Marcus's central thesis that the Veltan Empire was a machine built for conquest, not governance, and could only maintain control through perpetual violence. The breaking point came 2 years after Kepler 4, when the Rigel Confederation 17 worlds that had declared simultaneous independence successfully repelled a Veltan punitive expedition through coordinated application of human tactical principles. The victory wasn't just military, it was philosophical. The galaxy had learned that the Veltan war machine could be beaten by species willing to embrace humanity's final gift. On the 3rd anniversary of Marcus Vex's death, the former Veltan research facility on Kepler 4 had become an unlikely pilgrimage site. The smooth crater where the quantum cascade had occurred was now surrounded by monuments erected by visiting delegations from free worlds. Each bore the same inscription, carved in dozens of languages. The door was never locked, but perhaps the most fitting memorial stood in the ruins of Earth itself, where automated systems had somehow survived the planet's bombardment. Deep in the Cheyenne Mountain complex, a quantum beacon activated on the anniversary of Marcus's final broadcast. The message it transmitted was simple, broadcasting on all frequencies to any ship that might still be listening. This is Terra. Broadcasting on all frequencies. Humanity is extinct, but the human spirit lives on in every species that chooses freedom over safety, death over dishonor. We are gone, but we are not forgotten. The door was never locked. The door will never be locked. Remember us and choose well. The Veltan Empire would spend the next decade trying to locate and destroy that beacon, never understanding that it was broadcasting from a planet they had already reduced to radioactive ash. Some signals, once transmitted, could never be silenced. In the end, Marcus Vex had accomplished something no human military commander had managed during the war. He had turned humanity's extinction into victory. Not the kind of victory measured in territory gained or enemies destroyed, but something far more dangerous to an empire built on fear. He had transformed defeat into inspiration. The galaxy would never be the same, and somewhere in the quantum foam that had replaced Kepler 4's research facility, Marcus Vex's laughter echoed through dimensions, carrying with it the sound of doors opening across 1,000 worlds. The human race was extinct. Humanity was just getting started.